I promised myself never again a startup. Also, I promised my wife, to be honest. But in the end of the day, the physical molecule needs to be taken out of the air or need to be avoided to get into the air. So it's a physical process to a certain point, or you shut down the industry to a certain. And you stand in front of the door, you open the door, you need to push yourself to say, that's my main focus. Yeah. Get them going, get them in the right direction. He was jumping in front of the glass door and say, look at it, and I said, sorry, it seems that somebody needs to give me an important message. Yeah, enables us to really focus to help European industry to decarbonize faster and more cost effective.
In this episode of the Found podcast, Hugo and I sat down with Florian Birner, a co-founder and managing director of Planeteers, which is a climate tech startup based here in Hamburg and who is developing a sustainable, scalable CO2 capture and storage technology. And we've covered a lot of topics, starting from the Florian's founder's journey to the climate tech scene, not only in Hamburg, but also overall in Europe and in the world. We also talked about how they are developing their first reactors to capture CO2 and their road ahead. Have fun listening to this episode. Welcome, Florian, to the Found podcast. Florian is co-founder and managing director of Palantirs, a climate tech company founded in 2022.
Sorry. The Palantirs is something else.
Yes.
Let's
start again.
Just wanted to correct that.
Planeteers, yeah.
Planeteers. Let's be very clear on that.
Yeah, no Peter Thiel here. You are a co-founder and a managing director of Planeteers, a climate tech company founded in 2022 in Hamburg that develops scalable CO2 capture and storage based on accelerated natural weathering processes, essentially filtering carbon dioxide from the air, converting it into mineralized water, and storing it safely and permanently in the ocean. Since founded in 2022, Planeteers has closed... Oh my God, I'm going to learn it by the end of the podcast how to pronounce it correctly. Planeteers has closed a mid-seven-figure seed round, and you are now raising the next round as well. You brought a pilot reactor online at the Hettlingen wastewater treatment plant in 2024, and shortly after, the company won the Hamburger Gründerpreis and the Deutsche Nachhaltigkeitspreis, which is German Sustainable Award. You are originally an industrial engineer. You began your career at Bosch, followed by a leadership role at Linde Engineering, and then you founded the health tech startup, which you exited successfully. And then you started Planeteers. Yeah.
Surprisingly, yes.
Surprisingly.
Something completely different.
Tell us a little bit more about your journey. You started as an industrial engineer, your background is an industrial engineer, right? You worked in a completely different domain, doing completely different things, and then you transitioned into building in medtech, and then eventually to Planeteers. What's the story there?
In general, I would say it's just life, I studied electrical engineering and went into the car manufacturing industry for the science department, so how cars could look like in 20 years at this time. Unfortunately, it wasn't electrical cars for Robert Bosch now. But yeah, it was very interesting to know, to get to know this industry, which is one of the biggest industry that we got in Europe, and also very on a high level, on process level. So very cool entry, I would say, for me at least. And moved to a more oil and gas, big industrial plants company, Linde Engineering, which was also quite interesting learning curve, very internationally, very product orientated, a big technology company where you can learn a lot, and you are responsible for quite a lot of money in a short term of time because everything is just huge. And then actually I had done an MBA at the WHU in Düsseldorf and met my now co-founders at this time. And I wanted to go into consultancy actually, to McKinsey at this point. But just briefly before I started, it was a colleague of mine from the WHU, which said, let's work more for less money. Let's found a company. That's basically a very clever decision at this time.
Sexy proposal.
Yes, exactly. No, and it hooked me. And at this time, we just started to dive into the whole founding and like disruptive approach for the secondary healthcare market, where you can buy healthcare products, and it was quite an experience because it was completely like a different kind of industry and very digital.
Is it?
Not at this time, but this was our approach to disrupt this digitalization, because in the end of the day, the current customer journey at this time was you go to the doctor, you get a prescription, and then you go down to the doctor's
house.
Sanitätshaus, exactly, and you get whatever you need, a bandage or insole or whatsoever. And in the end of the day, they still ordered by fax machines. But nowadays, it's way easier to get the customer's digital journey. You can go digital to the doctor and stuff like that. So why should you get after if you have the prescription up and go down to a house where it was they have a good margin and a very big market. It's very a niche market in the end of the day. I think it was 10 billion market in Germany with 3,000 to 4,000 stationary houses. If you have such a big margin, why should you move? We moved heavily into this one. And then in 22, there was an opportunity for me to get a new orientation. I promised myself never again a startup. I promised my wife, to be honest. And just shortly after that, and too many bottles of wine, Frank and Jens, we decided to kick it off. And in December 22, we founded the company. Something completely different again. But it's quite interesting how starting a company, it's similar in different kind of colors, but you need to be, very resilient and have quite a lot of self-motivation to go even on low days into the office and motivate the team and bring it forward and learn to overcome learning curves quite quickly to a certain point, or not. This also happens, of course.
I feel like in your journey, there's many chapters we could double click and explore, but maybe tell us about Planeteers and those listening, right? What does Planeteer do, and what's your pitch?
Yeah, basically, we are the first end-to-end carbon capture and storage solution for the industry or for any kind of emitter. What does it mean? Of course, we got the Regulations Act. So in 2030, the industry needs to decarbonize by 55%. That's the law, but there's a lot of industrial players, biogenic CO2 source, non-biogenic CO2 source, which want to reduce, which are self-motivated, let's say, on their sustainability targets. And the current problem, what they are facing is mainly that current solutions are either capturing, and then you need to take care of transporting it. Currently, the idea is to have huge pipeline infrastructure projects all over Europe, which is gigantic and very cost intensive. And then transport it to Denmark or Norway by ship or by pipelines as well. And you have a legal qualification aspect and then a storage partner. And somebody needs to take care of all the MRV aspects, so the measuring, reporting, and verification. You can say the TÜV.
Yeah.
So that you promise that it's actually happening. And it's ultra cost intensive, very diverse and very fragmented, the market. And it's a lot of defocusation on your technology, on your process, or on your competitiveness. And therefore, even the players which are willing to do so, struggling with implementation. And our system is based on a natural limestone weathering process, as you said before. And we are just plugging our system into the chimney and extract the CO2, produce like CO2 enriched water. And then on the other process, we liquefy the mountain. So we have limestone slurry, and they come together in a reactor process and convert to mineralized water, bicarbonate, hydrogen carbonate. And this you can release into the rivers and ocean because it's a natural process in itself. And we just speed it up from 1,000 years into seconds and have an end-to-end solution, including the MRV. And due to the fact that it's so simple,
plug and play.
plug and play. Thanks. It's very cost efficient on the capex and the opex side. So we keep the customers of ours in the industry in Europe mainly competitiveness for their product on the global scale. And that's actually why we just been awarded the ERC award from the European Investment Committee to stable competitiveness in the European industry. And we are now installing our second biggest plant, I would say, which is a 1,000 tonnage plant. It will be also in the north of Germany at Kiel. Also a wastewater treatment plant with biogenic CO2 where you can produce credits which you can then sell. And it's important because we are using most probably Baltic seawater, which is a very good reactant, and we are actually bringing a positive impact. We are fighting ocean acidification with our product water, which is a positive side effect. Now we are discussing project here in Hamburg, but also in Norway or in Switzerland or Oman with industrial emitters. To start with a smaller project like 10, 20,000 tonnage, but then scale it to 280,000 tonnage and so on. So scale fast to create a big impact. That's a little bit the story.
I found it super interesting. While we were preparing for the podcast, we saw that you put those production units in containers, right? That you then use like a green paint, basically. And this is what you essentially like offer to, like you install basically that at the customer's facilities, right?
Yeah.
But you do not sell those units, right?
Yeah.
Basically, you sell the carbon certificates, right? That they can buy from you.
Both.
Or like, what's the business
Yeah,
model?
the business model is actually also there. We are coming from the customer end. Yeah, you need to move in the area which they know already. So our industrial customers, know how to buy a big plant, how to manage a big plant, but also to sign a service agreement. In our case, for decarbonization or carbon credit services, for over the lifetime of the plant. So we have a one-off revenue when we are selling you the plant. This is normal behavior in oil and gas, for example, but also bigger other industries. And then moving forward to a recurrent revenue in our business model for the 25 plus years of the lifetime of the plant, which is also good for us. But of course, we want to enable the customer to really focus on their product and not to take care of the decarbonization in itself.
I mean, it sounds like there's only benefits to your solution, right, for factories. So they comply with their regulations, so CO2 emissions are neutralized. Then you even make credits that they can sell, so generate money. Then there's the acidification counter. So what's stopping you basically from scaling at such a rapid pace? Is it difficult to implement, or what's the...
I would say the overall geopolitical situation does not help, but we see this in any kind of startup currently, which is focusing on climate tech specific or impact specific approaches. That's why we are focusing on industries at the not go to market, but in the first entering process, where we bring co-benefits. As you said before, for example, wastewater treatment plants, we can install additional revenue because they get a share of the carbon credits which we produce with their CO2 waste currently. So they can offer better prices to their local community. Lime industry, for example, we can work with not just their very cheap raw material, but they're also sitting on a lot of wastewater or waste material where they need to pay fines, disposal management fees, something like that. We can use this material quite on a high level, and so we get rid of waste for them. So it's also a co-benefit. Steel, there's some kind of co-benefit. So also cement. So we are looking more in this co-benefit area and also providing decarbonization services. But it's a little bit the regulatory situation, which is taking quite a long time for example, the EU to install very clear aspects for the industry how to act, because there's a lot of movement still. What is allowed, what is not allowed, how can your accountability work towards this? And basically, also, of course, funding in itself is also a scalability aspect. Yeah, how much equity versus money you want to leverage in your company to speed up the process, because there's also a threshold where you can have too much money in a certain point. At least this is our belief. If you look at Elon Musk, he might be having a different kind of approach in that, but I think these are the points which are a certain kind of hindrance. But I think in our process, we quite focus on reach 60%-ish of our technology, which is like so-called on-shelf equipment, like pumps, pipelines, vessels. Because if you keep it simple on that one, it's first, of course, very cheap to provide, but the international infrastructure for supply of this kind of material is already there. Because a water pump you can buy anywhere in the world already. So you can scale in this dimension quite fast. So we try to keep it on a high level and only focus on the core knowledge, which we need to keep in-house.
Okay.
So, but implementing such a supplier base, we are only 3 years old. You need to have a
Build that
certain
expertise,
time.
this know-how.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so you like is what you're saying is that essentially like on the technical side of things, the problem is like solved, right? So there are like no technical limitations, and you can like ramp up your production and produce more like units, right? And but on the regulatory side, you have some constraints, right? What about like the business side? Do you see that those companies who say on paper, right, like they are committed to climate goals, that they want to buy like those climate certificates or whatever? Does it actually materialize into action? Do they actually put money to where their mouth is?
Yeah, you got two kind of customers, I would say. I mean, we are selling credits already since the beginning, and it works out. But I think it's when you look more into the industry, you've got like the first movers, which are like have the willingness to, and then you got people which need to challenge themselves. In only 3 to 4 years, I need to apply to the regulations. And how can I ensure competitiveness of my product on the price level? So they are looking into either deeply invest to optimization of technologies which they already know, which is very cost intense. But some of them, and what we broadly see is buying a smaller unit, for example, 5,000-10,000 tonnage unit or something like that. Install it, see how it runs, and then scale it to their demand. Because, I mean, TRL level, normally, if you talk to industry players, they are asking for so-called reference lists. Yeah, and if you have another reference list which is 30 plus years old, it's hard to sell a product. So, and none startup can have this. But on the technical side, we have proof that it is working in the field in real-life customer environments. We are now scaling on that. But of course, you can always like decrease energy demand, increase efficiency, continuous improvement measurements. This we of course need to do. The good thing is we're already applying to the target which is needed in 2030. So we can already solve this problem. So that's a good advantage, I would say. But industrial scaling in itself is always a challenge. So you can't just jump from a 10,000 tonnage unit to a 100,000 tonnage unit. You will learn something on that way.
This is in software.
Yeah.
Scalability
Exactly.
is a different
Exactly.
ballgame.
It's hardware. And unfortunately, there's a lot of investments going in AI regarding also impacting climate.
Mm-hmm.
There's a calculation around about 10 to 15% can be impacted by that or reduced by that. But in the end of the day, the physical molecule needs to be taken out of the air or need to be avoided to get into the air. So it's a physical process to a certain point, or you shut down the industry to a certain emitting point, which is, I think, even harder because where's the acceptance to that?
Yeah. Which, from your experience at Linde Engineering, for instance, I think you worked on plants at an international scale, right? And then you went into medtech or health tech, completely different field. Like, what would you say you've taken from your past experiences into what you do at Planeteers, right? Like, which of the co-founder, what's your engineering hat, or are you more the guy fundraising?
I would say, I mean, looking at the experience what Frank and I bring to the table is more the active founder roles. I mean, Jens is the science guy, and he's like top in the world when you talk about carbonate systems. And of course, we benefit that because I lack in this knowledge. Yeah, you don't need to ask me too deep about the chemistry. We got luckily really good team players on that one. I think Frank experience in the corporate and mine, and also in the startup world, is the combination, like getting the technical experts and pushing them in the right direction, where we need to see the technology develop to have a attractive business case, because our deepest belief is you need to have a business case that works and is scalable to create real impact and scalable impact. But of course, having done startup experience of founding a company, it helps because it's emotionally quite a roller coaster. Yeah, it can be very from several times a day, and to keep this in a balance and to push the team in the right direction. I think in the end of the day, Frank and I see us only in the enablement management of the team, because they are the experts. Either it's MRV, LCA, science, and or on the other hand, the deep guys which are working in the field, in the engineering, how to install it, how to work the process in the field. And combining these two experts' point of views and creating something which generate impact and a scalability, I think this is our task to a certain point. And the willingness to learn, I would say.
That's a startup mindset, right? Always learning and keeping cohesion. Maybe Project Elix, I was curious about that. So that was recently launched. Can you tell us more a bit about what that project is?
It's actually our first reactor, or real reactor, which we ever built. It was we are coming from the lab reactor, which was like a lot of manual steering, and it only needed to prove that it's theoretically possible to transfer from paperwork and calculations to a physical molecule. And after that, we built first around about 100 tons capacity per year unit, which we tested in the garage here in Eimsbüttel in Hamburg. And but it was quite clear for us to not just stay in the like safe environment. We needed to go out to prove our technology in the field, because otherwise it's not proven in our opinion. And we put it into a container and done a roadshow. Means we went to several different kind of industry scenarios or locations, customers. And it worked quite well. And so we had the opportunity to professionalize this, more automatization, more external steering, recovery systems. And then we had the opportunity to place it in Hittlingen. And it's a wastewater treatment plant where we now fully approved by Isometric, which is, as I mentioned before, the TÜV, if you want to call it like this. And this is now producing certificates. And it is still a test plant where we, sometimes we allow ourselves to shut it down and try something new, because we want to learn on this plant as well. But it was, let's say, the engineering baseline for the now 1,000 or even 2,500 tonnage plant, which is going end of July to Kiel. So we always try to learn from the technology which we understand and scale this, but also have 2 or 3 additional pathways where we try something new. And this is our approach to learn and scale fast at the same time.
Florian, just zooming out and looking at the continent, what's the amount of CO2 emissions that Europe produces annually, like roundabout?
They're quite a broad figure. I only know that to fill the gap, to reach the 2030 legal aspect, I think we are around about 500 million short emission tons per year. We more reliable figures, what I can say is we done a so-called geomapping for our specific technology, because we need to be close to water, have limestone in a close distance to a certain point, and of course the emission, biogenic or non-biogenic, it's not relevant for us. And we done a so-called geomapping where we looked at the point emitters individually, and for our technology, there's around about 260 million tons of CO2 emitting per year in Europe, which converts around about to 40 billion market size for our technology usable or targetable. And yeah, it's quite a lot of volume. Talking from a 1,000 tonnage
Right.
plants per year
Okay, 1,000. Yeah.
to 260 million. We will not conquer it in the next 2 years. I think this is clear, but that's why our business model is not only that we are producing the plants and doing that with our customers, but we also want to push our technology in the licensing to have a third kind of business model, revenue stream aspect, and then you can scale the technology in itself and therefore the impact quite easily.
Speaking of scaling, so the government, let's say they fixed the targets, right? So 2030, we have to be
Yeah.
at this amount of emissions. What about scaling the startup solutions that are addressing exactly this, right? I mean, there's the running knowledge that Europe is so super regulated. You're in hard tech as well, so you're working with probably a lot of red tape. So what's your experience there in, rolling out these systems onto plants and dealing with officials?
There's a couple of official and non-official parties which are pushing the topic really, really good. But overall, I would say it has been a little bit defocused due to geopolitical situations. But I think it needs to get more founders in action. I think, I mean, we are not far away from the Office of Impossible Founders, transferring the knowledge of the science into like scalable business cases, startups. I think this is a fantastic approach in the end of the day to push the topic, and we really need to push everybody into the persuasion not to go firstly into industry. It's also a good pathway for your career, but take the risk and just try yourself. And always come from the customer point of view and think about scalability. I mean, there are good solutions, and every drop helps, so to say.
It needs to be faster, though.
It
challenges.
wouldn't be a problem if we go a little bit faster on the topic. Yeah, it should be helpful, because I mean, just thinking about a gigaton, and we need to reach 40-ish. It's quite a lot of amount of volume what you have there. So so if you think about carbon storage, to compare it, we need to store around about 40 to 50 gigatons per year. So by 2050 latest. The ocean stored since the beginning around about 38,000 gigatons of carbonate systems into the oceans, more or less. So compared to this figure, it seems small, but there was a long time frame before that. So I think that's also a little bit the problem, that you can't really explain it to people with to grasp it, because it's such a big amount of, we calculated it just for fun. A gigaton, it's maybe the top of the Matterhorn, the picture, but if you're standing in front of it, it's quite a big mountain, and just, if you're talking about the top half, it's a lot of material. So it's quite a big task on a global scale.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's not that we're not aware of the issue or the size of the problem, and even the solutions are in many cases known, right? So it's like execution simply, and I guess the whole climate tech, there was various waves. There was a clean tech wave, now there's a climate tech wave, which is abated as well and slowed down. But the physics don't care.
Yeah.
The physics of the
and
problem.
The interesting point is actually that as longer we take, more complex it's got.
Yeah.
Not just, like carbon capture and storage, but the side effects, like food shortage. You have more resilience in the food system in itself. Yeah. So where's our food is coming from, or the food for the animals which we are then eating. And so it's getting broader in the complexity. And then at one point you need to ask, where do I allocate my resources? Because we are limited to a certain point of whether it's energy demand or brain power or capacity and money. So it's like the filter is not closing down, it's opening up actually as longer we take. So it's getting more and more complex, and therefore the risk increases more and more.
When I read climate research and about the problem, the scariest word for me is like tipping point.
Yes.
The cascading
Yes.
effect, right?
Yeah.
Like something, oh yeah.
Yeah.
That for me, like this compounding exponential effect
Yeah.
is just scaring the shit out of me.
It is.
And I guess that's when you have to decide, okay, how much more do I read this, or
Yeah.
let's just get to work and work on the.
Yeah, but it's a little bit, like, of course, I think it always helps to face a problem and to be aware of the
Yeah.
problem. It's like, like I know that I have a broken something and I'm not going to the doctor. It's not helping on the long term. But there is, I think, a certain kind of risk that we played a little bit too much with resources what we have here on the planet. And currently, I know there's a couple of companies are working on getting a planet B, but I think we are not there yet in the end of the day. And if you look at the complexity, and what I meant before is also, like the next thing is the ocean acidification. If there's a tipping point it reaches, it goes even faster, the temperature and I think 80% of the fish's diversity is already decreasing, and so there's so many points that I think it needs to be managed especially from the more Western world, to focus more on that, because I think it's on the geopolitical aspect to tell a country or a society which is just in a rising stage, like better social systems, healthcare systems, where they're just building up and bringing the whole volume of the population into that. You can't tell them, please stop eating meat because of the environment. I think it's a generational aspect as well. So the complexity will be there even longer. So we need to solve it on the technical scale quite fast, I think.
Do you still believe that, you mentioned quite a few times the geopolitical tension that we're like experienced in basically all parts of the world right now, and like Europe leading the change in the technology and basically in the sentiment as well. But like, is it possible to achieve these goals without like other parts of the world working closely together? Like what we see in the States basically, right? Like this decline of the commitment and the like whole narrative, right? It's not there, right? And it's probably not coming back in the next few years until Trump is in the White House. So how do we because Europe is still small in terms of like population, right, compared to like other regions like Africa or like Asia or the States as well. So how do you see that happening?
Boy, it's a very political question, to be honest. Maybe there will be always waves of going one step forward, going two step backs. I think to a certain point, if you're motivated by a topic, and it doesn't have to be climate tech, you can be motivated by something else as well. And you think it's the right path to follow, you should consider, of course, waves or impacts towards your business model and how you want to grow. But if you're thinking you're following up a right path, then you should proceed that, as long as you believe in it. Because in the end of the day, I can only, impact my close environment to a certain point. Of course, if you're getting on bigger stages, you can impact more. But this is, to a certain point, not in your hand. So I'm, for example, very pleased with the 5 years plan of China.
Yeah.
For example, I mean, they have a very strategic approach to the whole topic. They are now looking into wastewater treatment plants decarbonization, which is the first really big step. They're doing a lot of renewable energy. So I think they are absolutely underestimated where their long-term target is and how they precede this kind of target, because most of the time they're getting in the right direction on that points, and at least what they are setting. I don't want to challenge the political aspect on that one, but if they are setting their target, normally they are going
Stick
in
to
the
the
right.
plan.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's a very positive aspect. You also see this in Japan, in India, they have plans. So it's not just Europe. And I think it will be getting more extreme, that the people will be more active again. So that's what I mean with waves. And need to ask yourself, how long is a wave I can survive?
How much should it burn before we
Yes.
actually do,
Yes.
swerve
Yeah.
and do the change that's
Yes,
needed?
exactly.
I mean, China is a tricky one, right? So leading the whole value chain when it comes to renewables, clean energy, electric cars. Let's use that example.
Mhm.
Typically, an industry where Germany is very strong. What's the best thing for the planet? Might be that we just let the whole market
Yeah.
import Chinese cars. So we're all on EVs, cheap ones. But then goodbye Volkswagen and all the auto manufacturers. So Europe is kind of towing the line between, okay, what's good for our sustainability goals versus what's going to kill our industries. And it's like, how do we?
And I think also this is a trick question in the end of the day when you think about, do you risk scale towards, it doesn't have to be Germany, there are different countries as well will be impacted by certain kind of moves. But I think, if we are talking about economy, then to a certain point, if we decided at a one stage that we open it up to a global market, you need to also be competitive on a global scale. And I think it's always hard to blame, we focus on this technology and there's somebody's new is coming and invent something completely new. And you say, oh, then it's not good anymore. I think if you're entering the competition only under the aspect that your product is the best, then it's not real competition what you're getting yourself into. So I think actually it's good to be challenged once in a while to create something new. Yeah. So I would say let's see it positive. Yeah. On the impact side, the climate impact side, I think you can't think on country-specific behavior.
We're all in the same boat.
That's how it is.
How is it for you to always maintain that optimistic view on the things being a founder, right? You see like a lot of shit happening in the world, right? Affecting like you in the first place, right? And your business model. And we talked about like how you see the decline in the VC money being invested in climate tech startups and all these like geopolitical tensions. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I feel like that for founders, like probably the most essential skill is just having this unshaken belief in what you're doing, right? And not giving up and not being, like trying to protect yourself from all this negativity that is going on around you, right?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
This is something actually I'm still continuously learning. At the beginning, when I first founded my first company, it was more, I need to, know all the facts and the technology and, understand the customer perfectly. Of course, you need to do this to a certain point, but it's shifting more and more to having enough resilience to overcome waves when we talked about it, and also push to find the right team which is pushing the company themselves and the team towards the next level. We always talk a little bit about a high performance team, what we want to have, and partially already do have, and continues to improve that. Not in the way of you need to stay long and work till the night is, and it's more like what can I do best and better the next day, but also pushing my left and right partners and colleagues to the next level. So I think implementing a certain kind of resilience, because it's not working always good. Yeah, there's a lot of problems, more problems actually you need to overcome to. It's just, like how to face it. And learn fast, implement the next learning curve even faster, and push everybody in the team to the next level. And bringing this more and more into the team structure. Also, we are now close to 30. We are stepping into a critical phase from the organizational point of view to scale it and to have the mindset scaled as well. I think it's a very deep competence a founder should bring to the table each day. And sometimes, I'm quite honest, I have 2 kids, when you have a bad night and, they didn't let you sleep, and you go in there and you say, yesterday was not a good day in the office because of whatever. And you stand in front of the door, you open the door, and you need to push yourself to say, that's my main focus. Yeah. Get them going, get them in the right direction, and it's very important also to communicate it. Just yesterday, we had the leadership team meeting in the office and reflect on the half year, 6 months in 26. And sometimes you forget what you achieved. And to bring this in the mindset, you can always do more, but to reflect on what we have, we really like jaw-dropping moments yesterday. Were unbelievable. What only 6 months, and to celebrate this with the team, because sometimes you
just head down, you just
focus too much on the problem and also on the solution, and sometimes you forget this.
Yeah. Can you name a few things that happened in the last 6 months? Like the biggest milestones that you celebrated?
Organizational structure, to the scalability, to get customer contracts, huge successful points on the technical implementation, new team members, implementing them in the team, having a structure where we basically enable the people even more. EIC.
Yeah, tell us about that. Maybe I'm curious about.
I think there was a broad range of real success points where we force ourselves to celebrate it in the moment, but also to reflect, and also the feedback which we get now from possible investors from the next funding round, the Series A, what we are doing now. It's my task to do that, but also to mirror the positive feedback into the team, because they don't get the feedback from external sometimes. So I need to really push it into the team as much as I can, because they are sitting in the field and screwing and say, again, this doesn't work, and or it works or whatever, but they need to get the feedback. And the EIC was especially because it's very hard to get it. There's a very selective process behind it. And I think we've been selected. Now we are in the contract negotiation with them for a project-specific grant, which is around about 4 million, a mix between grant and invest. And then we also have the opportunity to discuss or call off equity invest, which they need to mirror, which is helping us for the A funding round tremendously, because we need to actually raise just the physical half. But it was a very selective process where you need to really provide a lot of data, a little bit like a due diligence process. And then when you're in Brazil in the final presentation, you really get challenged. And then I remember that I was actually in a investor call, and a team member was quite involved in that. He was jumping in front of the glass door and said, "Look at it, And I said, "Sorry, it seems that somebody needs to give me an important message." And I paused for a second, then the whole office escalated in a positive way. And it was a very proud moment to achieve this with the team, actually. So we are just the executor for that. But enables us to really focus to help European industry to decarbonize faster and more cost effective. And that was a selecting point.
Yeah. No, I'm asking because I work for Impossible Founders, so I'm always curious as to the tangible impact that these support organizations can have. I mean, EIC in Europe is of course top of the line. I mean, you mentioned also Respond, right? The accelerator from the BMW Foundation. So
I think it's a broad range what you can get. It's in between, like networking and knowledge exchange to hard euros, real invest. And in the end of the day, you need to do both. Greenlight, for example, it's a direct air capturing startup in Germany.
Florian.
Yes, exactly, Florian Hildebrand. I think he also just could, be a parent just recently. So he also put it in a podcast once that, fundraising on a political level it's real also a proactive fundraising approach. So, and this network events, Response, Air Miners, we have also been in Frontiers and several, or also the interaction and connection and exchange with Impossible Founders. It's just, you need to do that to learn fast, to scale fast, and to broaden your opportunities.
Yeah. Florian, maybe just a question about the Hamburg ecosystem, startup ecosystem, right? Your company is based here. All of your co-founders, as far as I understood, also are based here. Your team is here. as well. I think you gave a comment on the startup ecosystem here in Hamburg, and you said that even though we are not as big as Berlin or Munich, right, you still appreciate how efficient it is, right? It's easy to get like the contacts, and people talk less and they do more. Do you still agree with this thesis up until today?
I would say I only can judge it to a certain point because I have never started a company in Berlin. So, but the doors which have been opened proactively, willingly, supportively for us was tremendous till now. Of course, I think the Hamburger Gründerpreis was a little bit like the push in the right direction to get you on the map. But you talk to so many people on so many different events, and everybody's primarily asking, how can I support in small and big scale in the end of the day? And I think Hamburg has a real opportunity to even get a bigger pin in the map. I think especially also in Claptech, that's a lot of good startups around here. Could be very deep tech orientated startup scene, which is, I think, a very valuable form. I absolutely support it. Even if I'm born and raised in Munich, I love the city, and the whole project Argonaut, which we want to do here in Hamburg, it's, like creating impact for Hamburg with Hamburger people, like getting Hamburger to motivate and to get an impact for Hamburg. And I think it's tremendous, from politician to school systems, which are supportive. The whole variety is there. And we are really happy here.
I think the city has a lot of assets. It's like how to put it together. And I think the focus on the green tech cluster, I mean, there's already, I would say, a fifth of the startups here that are somewhat related to impact and climate.
Yes.
So definitely a chance, I think, for the
Yeah, just look
ecosystem.
at the Hamburger Sustainability Conference / Hamburger Climate Week. I mean, if you talk with the people there are politicians all over the world, from UN to, it is tremendous what the team around Otto has created or co-created here. Having this specific in the area of impact, it's tremendous. Having an opportunity to join this area here, just in your hometown, in a startup solution which is impact oriented, it's a huge opportunity, and I think Hamburg is really building the frontier on the topic.
Which is not as known as we would like it, right? It
But I
feels
think
like
that
the narrative is there
this
to
is
be
a little
built.
bit the nature of the Hamburg person. I mean, don't talk too much about the topic, but just do it. It's a little bit the
typical of the Hamburg, which we're trying to bust a little bit with this podcast and bring people on. But yeah, it's funny. All the guests say the same thing about Hamburg, about how it's like things happen more low key in bubbles. But you're validating that. Thanks a lot for coming on. I mean, we're already at the three-quarter marks, but it was super interesting.
Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah,
thanks a lot.
All the best for the fundraise.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Great.